as Janine said, I've been the Fulbright Program Advisor here at MICA for the last 10 years, which is crazy as I realize that. And then I also, if I don't see any of my previous grad students. If you are a grad student, I also teach the U+ Professional Development course on grant writing that hopefully will be in person in the fall, but I also teach it online in the spring. So also if there's any MFAS students that happen to be on here and want to do a 5-week intensive, that'll be usually the first 5 weeks of the spring semester. All right, so the plan for today in our condensed amount of time, because grant writing is such a big thing, so even trying to think of 20 minutes and then 10 for Q&A, as Janine said, I was like, woo, that's going to be hard. But so I've broken it into 2 sections. I'm going to talk briefly at the beginning just about general researching grants and opportunities and residencies. I think get tied in there as well for looking for money for artists. And some of it being related to COVID, but really just grant writing in general, and how that then really relays over into specific COVID experiences right now, as lots of people are looking for money. And so I'm going to talk about the researching, and then I'm going to talk about writing and things to keep in mind while you're doing that so you can put the best proposals forward, especially in a time when a lot of foundations and funders and individuals are going to be receiving a tremendous, I mean, they're always receiving a lot of requests, but a tremendous amount of requests. So how to make your proposal and your request stand out. So I'm going to start with this. I'm not even going to go through all of these, and I know these are recorded, and I'll add it to the list of the live links. There's a lot of different research, research opportunities out there and lists that are going. So I know that that can be really overwhelming, and even this list is overwhelming. But in my, research for students at MICA, and then my own personal research as an artist, these are the ones that I've found that seem the most concise. A lot of them will have overlaps, but it's worth going through them rather than some of these little ones that are popping up, because I think then you're just going to be so overwhelmed. In addition to just all the webinars, like now that everything's online, we can say that it's easy access, but I think it's a different type of overwhelming feeling when we attempt to start searching for opportunities for ourselves to continue our art career or emergency grants. So to start with, I wanted to just kind of break down that this might be old hat for some of you, but for many of you, it's the first time you're looking for grants or applying to anything since you applied to MICA. So when you're looking for different grants, it really can be broken down into 3 areas. And I think that's important because we can look at a national, like the national lists that are out there, like the New York Foundation for the Arts has a really huge comprehensive list. And these can be really big. So I often encourage people to really think, sure, you have these big lists and you can look at the, government, what the government's affording us right now, but then also breaking it down by region and state, and so that you can get really specific to where you live. Again, this is a way to think about narrowing the pool, so you're not just applying to these big national grants, but that you're looking in the middle here, you see broken down by regions, and then to the right then for states and cities. And with that, for those of you who are still in Baltimore, you can think, okay, it's in Baltimore that I have to look, or maybe you've gone home or to someplace else in general. A lot of these grants can be either for where you're living or where you have residence. So I think that's really important. I always tell, even when students are living in Baltimore, they may have another address someplace else that opens up the opportunities that are in that other state. Or city, like for example, like Kansas City has amazing grants that they offer specific for Kansas residents. And not all states will have this, but some of them get really specific. Southern Florida has a lot of opportunities for residents that are either from there or live there. And it doesn't even matter if you definitely have a permanent address there right now, but if you've lived there at some point in time. So that's a way to kind of narrow in your focus to make yourself stand out a bit more. Then you can get to the local grants. Hopefully you guys are familiar with all of these local grants that we have in Baltimore. But again, going to wherever you are originally from or where you have lived at one point in time to go to those smaller foundations. They'll have less money per se, but they'll have less people applying. And I think that is always really important to think of the competitive nature in general, let alone right now. There's also a lot of micro grants that are out there. And again, talking about Some of these organizations are still doing direct funding for artists, so they may be funding an individual project or an individual artist, or a collaborative or anything like that. And they come into play great for specific projects, but a lot of them have actually switched their gears and are doing COVID-related grants. So they focus either on emergency, and some places are doing both now. So I think, again, like keeping your options open of where you're looking right now to see what each foundation is providing artists at this particular time. And then going through again with just different types of grants that are out there. So, you know, we start with the governmental grants that are there. We have local organizations and foundations. There are travel grants that are still available, as Janine said and I mentioned. I'm the Fulbright advisor, and they still are going forward with their opportunities. So I've seen a lot of residencies that have suspended applications or postponed deadlines right now, but a lot of grants still are trucking along with limited staff and trying to find additional funding, and sometimes even collaborating with other organizations to pool their funds to disseminate. But some travel grants, there's not too many big ones out there anymore, but Fulbright is one. And the next cycle for that is 2021, 2022. So it's a year from now. So they're still continuing on with the application, presuming that that's going to go forward in the future. And that too is actually funded through the US government in partnership with 155 other countries. And that provides a living stipend to travel to another country to complete a project for 9 months after you've graduated from college. So that can be for those of you who are graduating right now, or those of you who are rising seniors or going into your second year of your MFA would all be eligible to apply. And there will be another longer Zoom session for 2 hours talking about that, since it is a big application. Professional development fellowships, again, with organizations that are continuing on. Hopefully you guys know Hamiltonian, and there are others that are out there. And this can be for both residencies, but also looking at what is it that you need right now. Is it funding to figure out how you're going to pay rent, or is it funding of thinking about larger picture of how you're going to sustain your art career? And sustaining your art career, sure, is the money that you receive now, and it can be funding for grants that you're applying for to complete projects in the future, because we will return back to some state of normalcy at some point. And then also thinking about how you're going to sustain that. And so professional development fellowships are there. Hamiltonian's application cycle is still open. And I think that's a really great sign to see that organizations, sure, some are folding, but a lot of them are really working together with their boards and fundraising and figuring out how to proceed. So we can talk about all the lists and stuff, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about other research. I know, was it last week or the week before, in the career development newsletter talking about the jobs and thinking about, oh, there's not that many jobs listed, and the percentage of it, a lot of it is the other work that you do. It's not just looking at the listing boards, it's finding other opportunities through other venues. And so looking at art blogs and websites to see things that may not be on the top radar. We all want to go to a residency at Yaddo or McDowell or get a Guggenheim, but there's other funding to be had in different ways. And the thing that I wanted to point out with this as well is that it doesn't always have to be arts organizations, and that's something important in all of your research for any opportunity you're looking for. A lot of the state and government websites that you're looking at may have art-specific grants, but they also may have community development grants, or they may have concept-driven grants. And so I'm just looking at this now. So like Seattle.gov, you can look at the environment, or like Save the Wetlands, and they may not be specifically calling for artists, but they're not excluding artists from those who can apply for those grants. And that can be a really exciting opportunity. And we see a lot more of those happening, particularly with arts and science. So they want to see a diversity of people that are applying for that. And another wonderful opportunity, if they're reading all of these science-driven, for example, or if it's like a food grant and they're seeing all these food bloggers, to see how artists are interpreting and contributing to that cultural capital is really important, and another angle to come in at. And then the jury is going to be excited to see the different ways artists approach topics. And I think that's always an important thing, is that the jury, if you want to think about it from the other side, is always reading lots of applications. And I'm going to talk about that with writing, but they're receiving a lot of applications. So when one of them stands out as not being the typical thing, it's, gets them perked up and excited just to even continue reading through the entire application. In a similar way, you have all of the arts organizations, professional organizations that are out there that are useful for utilizing their listservs and what they're providing. But again, thinking about outside of the box of other professional organizations that you may work with or have some sort of connection to, or family members have connections to, that maybe you have to be a member to apply for their grants, but maybe you don't have to be a member. For example, the Rotary Club, it's an old-time institution, but they still provide grants across the board to folks. So you're not going to see that on an artist listserv that's providing you all these different opportunities, but they're going to have opportunities that maybe you or family or friends have been involved with before. And then getting specific, we can think about networking and talking to the people that we know of other opportunities that may be useful. But when we're thinking about ourselves as artists, I think this is a great way to figure out, places that may want to exhibit your work, but also what residencies and grants you may be interested in. And so really studying the resumes and CVs of artists that you admire and that are at different points in their career. So even if they're very well-established artists and you're seeing a link between either the formal or conceptual elements of your work, what were the grants that they really started out with way back when, or looking at artists that are your peers and what they're getting or that are slightly above. Really running the gamut and seeing other ways. And that also is a great way to look back at, grants that were around 20 years ago. A lot of those actually still are. They change depending on what's happening, but another good resource for you. Another search tool to put out there for you guys is that when you're researching and you're thinking about residencies in particular, as I have here, but it would go for grants, is referring back to if you are an international student looking back at the opportunities that are provided in your country for grants, if you have dual citizenship, if you have family members that are from a place, if anything like that can open up other opportunities for you as well. And these listservs are also going to be different than the US ones. And so a lot of times, not all of them, but you have to pay to post on, I'll go back to NYFA is a big one, the New York Foundation for the Arts. Like you have to not right now, but usually you have to pay to post listings there. And for smaller residencies or grants that don't have the kind of funds to post everywhere, that if you go to their country listservs, you'll have more opportunities that are opening up. And I also always like to include in presentations, just a useful tool, is that when you are on google.com, that's America, that's the US, but if you're looking for specific residency or grant opportunities in a country, to remember that Google exists differently in other countries. So google.de is for Germany, GP for Japan, and so on. So if you go to google.any of those things, it's going to open up a lot more opportunities, again, for smaller foundations that aren't posting on international websites. I'm going to talk about residencies just very briefly, because I do consider this, it is a grant. They can provide a lot of different things for you. And some of that is going to be time and space, which so many of us are looking for. And I know that sounds very daunting, but you have to keep in mind that most residencies you're applying for are going to be in a year. So as much as we want to secure funding to make sure that we can exist our day-to-day life, if we want to think about the trajectory of our careers and where we're going, is thinking about what do we want to be doing in a year. And a lot of these programs are still accepting applications. Some have been suspended. A lot of them that had deadlines in the last month or so have extended deadlines. So May, which I usually don't think is a big deadline time, actually is now. So there's a lot of deadlines that are going to be coming up. So to keep in mind with residencies is to make sure that you do the research and that it matches what you're looking for. So first, I have the cost on there, keeping in mind that some residencies are free. A lot of them are still free, but some of them have fees, and thinking about, is this opportunity, whatever that fee is going to be, is $200 to spend a month someplace in a new artist community going to help you? Or is that just not possible? Is $2,000 okay? Like I can't do that, but if you can, and that's going to help you along the way, then you can look at those. But keeping in mind, like, what is your real budget of what you could afford for these opportunities, and not going beyond your means for them. Because we have, have many ways to establish our communities around us and how to figure out places to work. The location and time commitment is a big thing with residencies. If you're looking at local residencies, many of them may have time commitments that you have to be there for 20 to 30 hours a week. So again, keeping in mind, like, can you feasibly, is that feasible for you to be there that often while also having a job? What are the facilities and the equipment available? The number of artists at a time. I think that's a big one that people don't always think about, is that some residencies may have 3 people, some 15, others 60, and thinking about where's your comfortability level. And just because you're going there and it's becoming a line on your resume, I don't personally think that that's a great reason to do a residency, unless you're really going to enjoy that time and be productive. So over the years, I've learned that I personally can't be in a residency with 60 people. It's just way too much for me. And I really love, though, the ones that are 3 to 15 people. So keeping that in mind, many residencies will have visiting artists or faculty that are coming through for critique. So do you want your residency to be about time and space and you having your own thing going on, or do you want it to be about having critiques with other people? And that is an important thing, because sometimes it's work time and sometimes it's reflection time. Sometimes they overlap, but I think that can be very difficult, especially once you're continuing as an artist after school. So thinking about that, where are you right now? Are you ready for critique? Do you want to be meeting people, or do you want the time to really just be hunkering down and working? Keeping in mind disciplines and career points. And this goes to focusing your efforts. It's definitely not about I guess you want to apply to a lot of stuff, but it's not how many things you apply to. It's really about connecting what you want and to the mission of what that organization is, be that a residency or a funder, connecting your mission and their mission to find where the sweet spot is. A career point is also one. A lot of emergency grants right now, to be the bearer of bad news, do have some restrictions that you have to be mid-career or established, or over the age of 40, or be, have a family, which can be great for some people and then eliminates others. So reading the fine print to make sure, like, just tossing your hat into something is really not going to get you anywhere. And you want it to be about the specificity of why this grant and this residency is best for you right now. So with all of that, which I know is a lot of information and very quick, but hopefully it just gives you an idea to get some wheels turning, and can answer more questions, and happy to take questions afterwards via email and whatnot. But I wanted to talk about writing. Now for, us artists, we're visual people, right? And we work hard through our education and continuing in our network of our peers after school in talking about our work. But it's not that often that we're really writing about our work. We have the artist statement, which I know scares everyone. But then when it comes to grant writing, the writing is actually quite different, and it's not about the artist statement. So some common errors that I'm always talking to my Fulbright students with, or my grad students with, is first off, and it again sounds terrible for me to say, but avoiding cliches. So I'm starting with that. In talking about right now your needs as an individual. And so at a time when so many people are in need, starting a grant by saying, I need this so bad because I am not in school, or I just got laid off, or a lot of people have these problems and you want to address them in the grants, but you don't want to lead with that. You really want to focus on separating yourself out of why you're special and why your ideas and your projects are special. Now, granted, some of these emergency grants are asking just for the nuts and bolts of, like, what did you lose? What do you need? What did you lose? What did you need? But when they're talking about sustainability of an arts career, it's best to start with you and what you're doing, and know that, your personal interests still continue despite everything else that's going on in the world. Another big thing is the structure in grant writing. And I know this is going to sound a little overwhelming, and I've been working on an application, so at the end, I'll share various versions of them. So the structure in grant writing is that you really want to lead with what the idea is. So in academic writing, we're so used to writing chronologically, right? We say where we came from, what we're doing, this is what I've been working on, and this is what I want to do with the money that you're giving me. So that what your ask is comes at the end when you think about academic writing and unveiling that chronologically. But in grant writing, you really want to flip that so that you're starting with the ask. I want $1,000 to secure my studio space for 3 months to complete this project. And putting that first and foremost, which seems kind of scary to just be like, I want this money. But again, when you think about a jury, they're reading lots of applications. And as they're reading them, they're like, okay, I gotta get through this. What is it that they want? Like, what do they want? What do they want to do? And if it is something where they're asking, where they have a variety of different funding levels that they may be giving, you want to include, I want $1,000. I want $5,342 for this specific thing. They really appreciate that put at the front, and so that there is a sense of urgency. You want to avoid in general things that are expected. Again, a jury in general is reading at least 100 applications. Now even more, bigger grants even more. So as a person is reading, think about all of the things that you read in general on the internet, let alone now when you're just inundated with information, is to cut out the fluff. Adverbs usually aren't needed as a general statement, but also you don't need to continuously refer to the grant's name. You don't need to tell them why this is going to be a great opportunity. They know that this is a great opportunity. They know that you are in need as an artist in our current day. They know that artists need money in general. So really just diving right in there, and the jury can be really respectful of somebody that appreciates their time. Be wary of redundancy in applications. So depending on what you're applying for, some of them may just have one proposal, but a lot of times they may have, give us your like a short bio on your finances, give us your artist statement, give us your proposal, give us this. So thinking about making sure that you're utilizing every possibility you have to give the jury something else about yourself so they can really start to build a full picture of you. I say in general avoid lists, but that I mean in particular to commas of like, I'm going to buy a boat and then get scuba diving equipment and get my license for scuba diving and get this book on a particular octopus. I don't know, but things like that just become like, okay, what is it? Like, I want to see focus. Like, ask me for a very specific thing. But the flip side on that is that if you are working on a bigger project, or it is a bigger grant that you're applying for, breaking things down into bullet points can work for you. And that would be something like if you have a larger project and you're like, this project is going to be addressing the construction of my rehearsal space, media, community outreach, local education programs. So those are larger things, but they allows them to get an introduction to that there are various components, but they're not having to read these run-on sentences. Beware of jargon and vague over rationales. Instead, use examples. So for this, I mentioned this someplace at the bottom, like show me, don't tell me. So I think that this is very useful even for like writing a cover letter. It's like, don't tell me you're great with time management. Give me an example of how you were able to work in different time constraints, or have been able to juggle a couple of different projects at the same time. So examples instead of over rationales that everybody thinks may be like buzzwords. I think we're at a point where buzzwords aren't really getting us very far. At the same time, jargon. So some applications that you're applying to may have maybe very specific to your field, but if it's not, you don't want to assume that the reader knows what you're talking about. So if you're working in a very specific dyeing technique with fibers, don't just use that word and run off. You do want to explain what that is. Or if there's a concept that you're working with a particular type of psychological concept and how that affects your artwork and the people that will be viewing it. Don't assume that they're going to know what that is, and be, in those cases, you can be a little bit like layman's terms. How would you describe this to your uncle who's never been to a museum? The last thing I'll put on these bullet points that I'll point out is the historical background. It's useful to have some of that information, but you want it to be more about you and what you're asking to do. So again, this goes to, if the first 2 paragraphs are about, this is what I want to do, and this is, this is why I want to work with you guys. And that's a good way to think about it too. It's not them just giving you money. It's about connecting your needs and wants and mission with the mission of the foundation or the funder, is thinking about putting that stuff first, and then at the end of it, telling us your background and why this is important in your trajectory as a career. So again, kind of flipping that chronological unveiling of information. Some things not to fear. Again, whether this is if you're applying for an emergency fund, or you're applying to continue your artistic profession, or it's a specific project grant that you're applying for, posing questions can be great, because a lot of funders, particularly if it's project-based, they know that you may not have all of the answers. So letting them know that these are the questions that I'm exploring, and I'll be utilizing your funding to help gain a better understanding of what I'm doing. When it comes to emergency grants, that can be a little bit more difficult with the posing of questions, and I think just more direct, like this money is going to be used for my studio. Breaking up timelines, a lot of applications don't require, no matter what the timeline is, whether it is related to COVID or career or project, but it may be helpful for you in compacting everything. If there are phases in whatever you're asking to be funded for, that you let them know. And that doesn't have to be from May 1st to June 15th. That could be in phase 1, this grant will allow me to secure a place to live. Phase 2 will be about me finding a studio space. Phase 3 will be about building off this project that I started while I was in school and wasn't able to complete. You do not need to have quotes. A lot of times people ask me this, like when talking about the history and giving the background of why you deserve to have this funding. If you are working on a specific project, if you do use a quote, definitely make sure that you cite where that's coming from, but don't think that you need to load it. Again, this is not an academic paper, and so you don't need to be justifying yourself through everything that's come before, but you can reference that you know it, and that this is how you're going to be expanding upon it. And the last thing that I'll include on here is, I guess 2 things, is showing trajectory. So that goes back to, like, if you're applying for an emergency grant or funding for an artist, okay, I am securing a place to live, then I'm thinking about this, and then I'm thinking about this, because in the long run, I want to go back to school for my master's. Showing how it fits in demonstrates the feasibility that this is going to happen, and so that they can see where you're coming from and where you're going. And if you have funding from other places, it's good to include that. A lot of times folks are afraid that, like, oh, but I already got this grant from this one place, and maybe they're not going to give me $500 if I got $1,000 from this person. It's actually quite the opposite, unless it explicitly says so in the grant, which is rare to see these days. But it usually demonstrates that you already have people rooting for you, that you are doing the legwork, and you know that, like, you're not necessarily going to get, a huge $50,000 grant to secure you for the next couple of years, but that you are, thinking about how do I utilize all the different people, whether that's having a local grant, having an emergency grant, having a specific cultural institution, or someone that, aligns with your conceptual ambitions. Hopefully it's not too loud. I live on a street that has a lot of ambulances. So I threw this up here, and I'm not going to read through any of them as I'm trying to keep an eye on time. But that, since this is going to be recorded, that you can go back to and see. So I put these up here as first paragraph examples. And it's really hard when you read through this, you're going to be like, oh my God, this is so concise. But it goes back to everything that I was saying before. A lot of times when I work with Fulbright folks, for example, Alyssa on here, when she was writing, it was, you know, it takes many, many iterations of a lot of, especially big grant proposals to complete. And so a lot of times what you end up with as your last paragraph, after you restructure everything and doing that flipping of chronological presentation of your ideas, that closing paragraph ends up being your opening paragraph. And it takes a long way to get there, but these are some examples of really precise way that the grantor reads this and they're like, okay, I completely understand the paragraph, the project in one paragraph. Now that I get the project, now I want to read through the details. Now I want to see how they're going to implement this and utilize the funds. Portfolio, just heads up, because I think this is important. And a lot of times we just think like, oh, the work's the best. But keeping in mind that even though, you don't have access to great photography facilities for your work at this time, or maybe you do, but a lot of people don't, making sure that you do spend the time to try to get some good photos of your work that is evenly lit. You can go, which I haven't even had on here, but in the olden days, before we had the photo rooms when I was in school, there was a lot of taking photos outside. So granted, we can't go outside, but maybe in your backyard, that actually can be a pretty good place to take some good photos so that you have even distribution of light. And then thinking about the size, if they're not giving you size requirements on what your image is, again, save them time. If you click on something and it takes a really long time to download, like, it's so frustrating. Again, a jury's going through so many of these, so there's no need for anything to be larger than what I've had up here. And then sequence and understanding the viewing format. Some places you won't get responses now, but if you think about this in the future, some places you can actually contact them and ask if they're viewing 1 by 1, or if they're viewing 4 in a row or 2 by 2 or something like that. And thinking about how you want to unveil the story. So maybe some folks I know say like, oh, you start with the best photo, your best image, and you end with the best image. But what happens to everything in between? Thinking about it as a story and an arc can often be useful. So sometimes that may be chronologically, or thinking about how maybe two bodies of work are talking to one another, and what kind of story do you want to tell with the portfolio presentation. All right, so that is me, and I think that actually might have been close to 20 minutes, in 20 minutes trying to get through. So before I open this up for questions, is, like I said, I was going to be brave and show you. Again, you won't be able to read all of this right now, but so I'm applying for a residency. I live in Brooklyn, and it's here, so it's not traveling to a new space, but it's over time. And this particular residency is doesn't have to be for printmaking, but they have printmaking and ceramic studios, and they have some other common shared areas. So I wanted to just show you guys that, there's how many here? I have 4 iterations right here, and it took me 2.5 hours. And I've been doing this a long time, but I do calculate how long things take me. So if you are thinking about narrowing in so that your mission meets the mission of who you're working with or who you want to fund you, is thinking about spending the time on specific applications and not just writing one thing quickly and mailing it around. I don't know very many people that has ever really worked for. Sometimes you get lucky, but a lot of times it's thinking about it. So this is my example for you here of how I started it, just going through of a brain dump after thinking subconsciously about it for a week, and I wrote chronologically because that's our inclination. I can't just start going backwards, and asking like my first question down here of like, do I want to talk about that? I'm not sure. In the next one, you see my notes start expanding more of like, do I need this? Do I need this? Oh wait, but you know what? I have this compost series, and it's about this idea that I'm talking about, but it's also about the history of still life as portrait. It's also could be related to environmental issues. It could be about this. It could be about this. But for the sake of word count, so this was 500 word count, but for the sake of word count, and again, keeping your ideas concise, because they don't want to think, again, those run-on lists, like, my idea is about this, and it's about this, and it's about this, and it's about this. We know that your ideas are so big and so bold. But we want to just focus on one. And all the other stuff that comes along with it supports it, but they don't need to know everything. And they're not going to be, you know, mad if you start diverging your conceptual ideas at any point. And also going back to then in relation to COVID, when you're thinking about those applications, again, you know, focus on what you want those funds for. As far as I can see right now, most of them are not asking for a detailed list. Some of them may have, you may have to come back to show them exactly what you used your money for. But again, they're people too, so they know that things may shift and change, and you just need to let them know along the way, but keeping your ideas focused. So in this iteration, I had more questions, and I flipped it so that I'm writing in reverse chronological presentation of what I want to do, and then giving the backbones of why this is relevant to previous work that I've done. This again is goes into, so this is the next version. I added some stuff, I took some stuff away. You'll see me at the bottom there asking myself, is like, is this line too cheesy? I don't know, because I don't want to be cliche. So I'm going to think about how to reword that. And then the last thing that I encourage all of you to do, and I don't know for the new people who logged on here. Oh, and these are even more notes now. So, so the list of notes continue to expand, even though most of it did not join in to the actual original idea, but they were ideas that start to come up. And when we're writing and we start, or we're even talking, we start adding more and more ideas, right? When we have a studio visit, you're like, oh, but what about this? And what about this? Do I need to put it all in there? I think maybe one thing wound up going back into my original thought, and all the other things were like, this will be saved for a rainy day, and maybe it comes into a future application. And the last one that I put up there for anyone who's been in my class before, I always like doing this because this is even for myself. So this is what I have to go back and do now. We all have the natural tendency of repetition with words, and the ones that we go to the most. So for me, growth and decay is always it. So I'm actually kind of happy that I only had 2 in there, but I was surprised to see that time came up 4 times. So these are just ways to kind of check yourself. So if you know that there are certain words that you use, the way that I do it, I just put it in the find button and I have it highlight, and I highlight all of them to then go back and to see like which ones are necessary and how can I change them. In particular, like this first one, like I really can't have compost and compost underneath one another, like visually, and just as a reader, you start to stumble over those. So a visual for you guys of ways to think about starting the writing process and attempting to self-edit, and then hopefully you have a trusted friend that will read through it as well. And I think there's 2 great things to do. You don't want too many cooks in the kitchen when they're reading through your grant proposals, but having somebody that maybe knows your work is good to read through, because they're gonna be like, why aren't you talking about this thing that's so important? You're like, I have no idea. And the reason is because it's so inherent into everything that you do that you don't even think you have to write it. So they're great for bringing those things out. And then having somebody that like really doesn't know art at all read it is another really great way to have somebody give you some critical feedback to make sure that it's understandable to somebody that's not in your field. Because I know that if I like, and I have this all the time with folks, like if I'm reading something about a specific type of like performance art, I'm like, wait, what does that mean? And I have no idea. And that's even like, you know, being in the MICA community, being in the art community, my wealth of knowledge on performance art, it just isn't as deep as other areas. So with that, I'm going to take a deep breath, and hopefully I didn't talk too fast, and hand it over to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin. That was wonderful. So now we can open it up to questions. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask of Erin?
They're like, no, there was too much information.
We had one question come through in the chat about these slides being posted, and I shared the link in the chat. Yes, they will be posted in MICA Network. They're not currently there, but check back after the presentation is over and it'll be posted there.
Great.
What else? So is anyone out there, is there a specific grant that you're applying for? Or is this just kind of to come and get some information? What are you guys thinking?
I've recently started. Oh, hi, this is Timothy over here. Thank you for doing this. I recently started applying for some of the emergency grants for artists when this kind of looked like it was going on further than my like allotted rent payment was going to be allowed. But it's also nice to kind of think, being a graduating graduate student toward the future a little bit. So that the fact that you kind of covered both was very helpful. And I had one tiny question just to maybe kick this off. When you said 5 MB max when sending something in, in the age of giant digital pictures, do you mean 5 MB total for the entire document in which we're sending them?
Yeah, that's actually still pretty big. I would say that it could be even less. A lot of places will have size limits, but when they don't, I've just noticed that students may have like these huge files, and it's like, it doesn't need to be more than, I don't think that I ever send anything that's like more than even 1,500 pixels in the longest direction, unless they ask for it. But otherwise, I would say no. Yeah.
We had another question come through in the chat. It says, I'm curious to know if there is a website specifically dedicated to artist residencies, or how do you recommend us searching for them?
Yes, there are several. So some good ones that I think are the New York Foundation for the Arts. So NYFA has a very comprehensive list. ResArtiste has a very comprehensive list for residencies. Transcultural Exchange has a lot of international residencies. And all of these are in the MICA Grants resource book, which is on the Career Development website.
Yes, and in the email that I just sent out before this started with the link, with the Zoom link, there was a bunch of resources for different grants for the career development source book. So you can go back to that email to see a bunch of different resources.
Yeah, I think the residency ones are like, they're going to remain pretty stable, but a lot of the ones that that Janine sent out do have both the emergency grants, and then are places that have residency lists all of the time. LMCC is another one that has a very comprehensive list.
We have another question in the chat that says, are you available to review grant applications one-on-one or offer advice on an ongoing basis?
Yes, so that's primarily Jackie Milad in our office. She's the assistant director for career development in fine arts, right? Is that her official title? So she's available for one-on-ones all the time. I primarily am just working with Fulbright folks, but if you had a specific question, I'm happy to help. You can email me.
And you can always email career development at mica.edu with your grant application. And then Jackie will be able to check it out and get back with you with more.
And she and I talk all the time. So like, if there's a question that like back and forth that we may have, so there's no deep holes or having to pledge your allegiance to one person in the office.
Is there a strategy for embedding links in a portfolio that you think is best? Like if you need a link to video content or to a website or something like that, something that like really helps the jurors not have to stumble over this next step?
Yes, some places allow it and some don't, and so it can be tricky because you don't know if the juror is really going to click on it. So, I mean, I would say that if you have embedding the link so that you have the live link to a specific, not a website, I wouldn't say here's the link to my website, but if your website was divided into projects, for example, that had like, this is one body of work, that you can do that. Or you may be able to, depending on how you have your website set up, and sometimes people would want you to maybe even set up a separate website so that you could include a link that's to a portfolio rather than to your personal website, because then you're really trusting on them to dig through to find what you're looking for. And definitely do it for, if it's video, I would say that, and most places would have that in the directions to embed the like a VMO in there and making sure that it's public.
Cool.
I've
Thanks.
sat on many juries before, and that may sound silly, but I've sat on many juries before where I'm like, well, that's locked. I can't actually even see it now. So. And the other thing that I was going to say with like the separate websites, I know that that can be ridiculous, but depending on what your website is like, I know my website, I can have links that are open to people. Like I can send them to a specific place on my website. And I use Incompendium. I'm not a like super person when it comes to that kind of thing, so that it can send them to a specific portfolio that's not viewable to anyone that goes to the website, but somebody with the direct link can go to it.
We have another question here in the chat. It says, often applications request links, including social media. Do you believe social media plays a role? Oh, plays in role?
Depending on the organization for sure. I think it depends on what, again, sometimes they're looking at it, but they definitely are looking at it if they're asking for it. But sometimes that may be something that the person who made the application put out there, but the jury changes all the time. So you may have one reoccurring person on a jury, but oftentimes they want to bring new people because they don't want to just be accepting the same proposals. And so, so that means that you're counting again on that juror, like, do they want to look at that? Like, I wouldn't, but other people would be really into it. I know that's not really helpful, but I think it's just important to keep in mind that like the people that are reading on the other side, there's going to be several of them and they are going to be different. So it's based on their personal, like, their personal opinion and interest, but is a good point for that. If you are concerned about your social media, thinking about social media presence, and then having 2 accounts, which I know lots of people do.
Any other questions? All right, well, thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Erin, that was so informative. Go to the career development website if you would like to schedule an appointment. Shoot us an email if you have any other questions, and also check out our website to see some more resources that are available to you. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.